Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am here to bring you guys my end of September reading wrap up. So I'm going to be reviewing all of the books that I read in the second half of September. If you want to hear me discuss all of the books that I read in the first half of the month, I will have that mid-month wrap up linked up in the cards above. So for today's video, I have just 12 books to talk about. I know for some people that may sound like a lot, but for someone like me, I'm used to reading a lot more than that in a couple of weeks or so. It's just that the second half of this past month was very busy for me work-wise, so I was only able to finish a book like every few days. But that is all done. I definitely have a lot more time to get back into reading more in October, which is always exciting. So without further ado, let's just jump into this wrap up. First, we are starting off with a bang. We are starting off with arguably my favorite read of September. That is Haven by Claire Kent. I have to give credit where it's due to Jen from the Book Refuge. I remember she talked about this series on a live show that we did when we were doing reading sprints for the Romance Takeover Readathon back in August. And hearing her talk about this post-apocalyptic romance series, I just knew that I needed to pick it up ASAP, and I am so glad that I did. So this is book one in Claire Kent's Kindled series, and so this takes place in a world where 4 years before the series starts, a really catastrophic event happened. It basically fucked up the entire ecosystem. Lots and lots of people started dying. The cities that are left are under martial law, so we are definitely in a terrible situation. And our hero and heroine of this story in particular are Faith and Jackson. They co-run this farm community together. It's called, I think, Haven Farm, if I'm not mistaken. And so when the world went to shit, they built a wall around their little community to protect themselves. So it's kind of this co-workers with benefits to lovers romance. And Claire Kent, I've realized at this point, because I've now since read another book by her, she is the queen of grumpy yet sweet and worshipful heroes that fall for the heroine first, which I just eat that shit up. You know, that is just one of my favorite kinds of heroes, and so this totally is that situation where Faith has no idea how Jackson really feels about her because he's so grumpy until he passionately confesses to her. And this is just a beautiful and stunning romance set in this dark and gritty and wild world, but yet it has a hopeful element to it as well, because we're seeing that life is slowly starting to come back. You know, animals are starting to come back. The weather is starting to kind of get back to normal as well. So there definitely is a light at the end of the tunnel, but this world is just so addictive to read about. It was very hard for me to put this book down and talk about a novella that packs quite the punch, because this book is only about 170 pages, but there is so much story and so much love packed into it that I really felt like I had read a full-length novel by the end of it, but in a good way. Like, it's not that it felt too long or anything, it's just, like I said, there's just so much story packed in there. So I cannot recommend this novella enough. I also raved about this in my 10 books you need to read before the end of 2022 video. That will also be linked up in the cards above if you are interested. But yeah, I'm obsessed with the series. I'm obsessed with Claire Kent's writing. I cannot wait to read the rest of the series that is currently out so far. And then I believe book 4 of this series is set to come out in December, which is so exciting. Next, I have The Way of the House Husband, Volume 8. I think you guys know that this is one of my favorite manga series at this point. It's kind of stupid and it's really funny. And if you don't know, this is about Tatsu, who is pictured here on the cover. He was a Yakuza boss. He left that life behind to marry his now wife Miku, and he has fully committed to being a house husband while his wife goes to work every day. And the humor in this truly comes from how seriously he takes his job as a house husband. And there's just some zany situations and characters in this, and it's just endlessly entertaining. The joke never gets old. Volume 8, I will say, wasn't one of my favorite volumes. I don't know, I just wasn't quite as entertained with this one as I was with past volumes, but I'm definitely looking forward to when volume 9 comes out for sure. So next we have Beautifully Broken Redemption by Catherine Cowles. This is the 5th and final book in her Sutter Lake series. This is also Catherine Cowles' first series, so I'm definitely excited to continue on with reading her backlist because I've really been enjoying these small town romances that have a really strong suspenseful element to them as well. So our main characters in this one are Anna and Mason. So in Anna's past, she had this boyfriend who she found out was dealing drugs because they get pulled over and there's drugs, I guess, in the trunk of the car. And her boyfriend like pins it all on her, that she's the drug dealer and that she's lying and all of these things. Her parents are the absolute worst. Her father was abusive and her mother covers up for that. And so because of all of that, she ends up in jail. She now has a record. And now she's living in Sutter Lake. She is working at, I guess, kind of a homeless shelter. It's just maybe a crisis shelter, you know, just kind of all of those things in one. She ends up running the shelter now, and Mason is someone who lives in Sutter Lake that just volunteers his time there. And because Anna is so mistrusting of men, and understandably so, she definitely keeps Mason at an arm's length. However, this is at the very beginning of the novel, so I'm not spoiling anything, but Anna's sister mysteriously dies. It seems that she's committed suicide, but that's definitely not the case. So now her sister's 2 children are about to just be given to her parents, but given that her father is abusive, she wants to keep her niece and nephew away from them, and so she's trying to get custody, but she has this record, right? And so Mason volunteers to marry her, you know, have a marriage of convenience so that they will basically have more credibility in order to gain custody of her niece and nephew. I know that was kind of convoluted. There's a lot going on in this book, but I wanted to kind of explain what we have going on. So I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. I would say this series as a whole is a 4-star. My personal favorite book of the series was Beautifully Broken Life, which was book 2. I didn't read book 1 just because I tried reading that one and I just wasn't vibing with it. But this one I really enjoyed. The marriage of convenience element was really solid. That's one of my favorite tropes ever. And yeah, like, it's just a really great small town romance. Again, there is a suspenseful element weaved throughout the story in terms of, you know, how Anna's sister passed away, and then of course the heroine's going to get in trouble towards the end of the book. That always happens with these kind of small town romantic suspense stories. But I did truly enjoy this book and this series as a whole, so yes, definitely looking forward to reading more from Catherine Cowles in the future. Next up we have Something's Wrong with Us Volume 2. This is definitely what I would call a dark romance manga. It's also kind of a mystery thriller story as well. I'm not going to get into the whole story because there's a lot going on, but basically the hero and the heroine have known each other all their lives. When they were kids, something traumatic happens that results in the hero, when they're kids, like I said, he accuses the heroine's mother of doing something terrible. So the mother ends up going to jail, and I think she dies in prison. And so now the heroine is kind of hell-bent on revenge against the hero and his family, kind of. There's a lot of shades of gray in this series, but basically it's years later. Now the hero and heroine are back in each other's lives, though the hero doesn't know who the heroine actually is because she's using a fake name. And so yeah, this series is just like the definition of messy, I would say. Like, yeah, it's very intriguing, very interesting, weird. I don't think I've read a story quite like this before. And yeah, I feel like I just need to read more from this series to get more of a concrete idea of how I feel about it, because volume 1 didn't give me much. Volume 2 gave me a bit more to go off of, but I still feel like I'm not quite sure what to think about this series. So yeah, I think I'll report back when I read another volume, but I would definitely recommend it if you're looking for something different, like I said. So next up, we have Nobody's Princess by Erica Ridley. To say I was excited going into this book would be quite the understatement. This is book 3 in Erica Ridley's Wild Winchester series. I love the Winchester family with my whole heart. I love them so much that I do want to go back and read book 1, which is the Duke Heist, even though I've heard very mixed reviews about it. I can't get enough of this family. I need to read more about them. But this is a historical romance series, and this one is specifically about Graham Winchester. Basically, the Winchesters are a found family. There was this Baron Vanderbean who adopted these 6 children, and they're all now grown up. The Baron has since passed away a few years before the series starts. So the Winchesters have this sort of business going on where people can just come to them for help and they'll do what needs to be done. It doesn't really matter what. They're kind of up for anything, really, except murder, I would think, but you never know with them. So then we have Kunigunda. She goes by Kuni throughout the novel. She's our heroine. She's from a fictional kingdom. I can't remember what it's called, but she desperately wants to become the first guardswoman in her kingdom. So she's on a mission in London to basically prove herself to her country's government that she should be a guardswoman. And so Graham and Kuni's paths cross because Graham is a master at like gaining intelligence, deciphering coded messages, things like that. And so he's been deciphering these coded messages about like a royal damsel in distress, which somehow leads him to Kuni, who is not a princess at all. So unfortunately, I ended up giving this 3 stars. There definitely were things that I enjoyed about this. Like I said, the Winchester family, they just hold a very special place in my heart. So they are featured quite a bit in this book, which is really great to see. Here's the thing, the romance ends up being a side plot. So to me, this reads almost like historical fiction with a romance thrown in. I will say in the first half, their romance is featured quite a bit, but in the second half, there is this other plot that takes over, that like literally completely takes over the story. And Kuni and Graham don't even do more than like kiss each other until like 86% of the way through. So yeah, this was just not my favorite. I feel like these characters and their story had so much potential, and unfortunately I didn't get to see that. And I also feel like some of their romance, like some of the development of their relationship was just like told to the reader and not shown. Unfortunately, this just wasn't my favorite, which is very disappointing because I loved The Perks of Loving a Wallflower, which is the previous book of this series. That book is still one of my favorite historical romances that I've read this year. So I did go into this with some pretty high hopes, maybe too high of hopes, but I am still excited about the next book, which is going to be Marjorie's story. So next up, we have The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. I think I got that title right. I sincerely hope so. But I had heard Robin from Paperbacks and Planners rave about this book recently when she was doing an interview with Bree from In Love and Words on her channel. So I was very excited about this because she compared it to The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, which is my favorite non-romance book of all time. So this is about Mika. She is a witch. This is a society where there was some kind of curse put on all of the witches of the world, where if a witch has a child, that witch passes away. So all of the witches on Earth are orphans by nature. And there is this house where there are these 3 young orphans who are all young witches. So the staff that works at this house ends up reaching out to Mika because she has a very big social media following, and they ask her to come to the house and to basically tutor these young witches so that they can learn to control their abilities before they hurt themselves or someone else. So this is a romance between Mika and Jamie, who is a librarian who lives at the house. This definitely has a grumpy hero, sunshiny heroine vibe to it. I do think I might have gone into this with a bit too high of expectations, but this was very adorable. It does give House in the Cerulean Sea vibes. It's, you know, also giving that like cozy fall, witchy paranormal romance vibe as well. So if that appeals to you at all, I definitely would recommend checking this out for yourselves. I gave this 4 stars. So next up, we have An Incurable Case of Love Volume 5. This is a grumpy sunshine romance manga between a nurse and a doctor. So we have grumpy doctor, sunshiny nurse. This volume was my least favorite. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars because this volume does a very typical romance manga thing where they introduce a rival to the main love interest, like to the hero of the story, and so now there's this love triangle that was completely unnecessary, and so I was just getting a little annoyed. So yeah, I gave this one like 3.5 stars, but like I said, I did read volume 6 last night and I did enjoy that volume more. So next up we have a really fun romance novella. This is The Stranger in Seat 8B by Nikki Castle. I will just tell you guys right now, I gave this like 4.5 stars. I cannot wait to read more from Nikki Castle. I am already obsessed. So we have Annie, our heroine. She is definitely an ice queen, grumpy heroine. She's a lawyer. She takes life very seriously. She has like no hobby. She doesn't do anything for fun. And then we have Damien, who ends up sitting next to her on this plane ride. He's very charming, very sunshiny. He loves trying to get under her skin. I love those kinds of heroes with my whole heart. And so yeah, they end up spending this plane ride together. Some spicy things happen on the plane ride, but then she like immediately runs off as soon as the plane lands. But it turns out that all of the connecting flights are canceled because of a snowstorm, and so she has no choice but to check into a hotel for the night. Meanwhile, Damien is staying at that same hotel, so they run into each other again at the hotel bar and they decide to spend the night together and things go on from there. Yeah, this was just so hot. We love a sunshiny hero who turns very dominant in the bedroom, and the dirty talk was hot. So I definitely recommend this. I had a really fun time with it. So next up we have My Lady's Lover by Nicola Davidson. This is the first novella in the Surrey Sexual Freedom Society series. I think this is one of the first series that Nicola Davidson ever published. I was really excited going into this one in particular because this one is about Amelia, who is a countess. She is not in a great marriage. Her husband cheats on her all the time. She's unable to get pregnant, and so he basically hates her for that. And then we have Beatrice, the other heroine, who is Amelia's lady's maid. And so Beatrice has had a huge crush on Amelia for years, but I mean, obviously they can never be together for multiple reasons. This was just a really beautiful and tender romance novella. I really love the premise of this series, given that it centers around this sexual freedom society. This is a small group of people that get together and just talk about sex. And yeah, this was just very sweet but sexy at the same time. I definitely would recommend it if you are looking for sapphic historical romances. Next up we have Always Practice Safe Hex by Juliet Cross. I feel like this cover goes really well with my shirt today. I'm here for the vibe. But this is book 4 in her Stay Spell series. To say I was excited going into this book will be putting it very, very lightly, and no one will be surprised that I gave this 5 stars and I absolutely loved it. So this is a romance between Livy Savoy. This series centers around the 6 Savoy sisters who are all witches. This also takes place in New Orleans, which is just the perfect setting for a paranormal romance series. And then we have Gareth, who is a Grim Reaper. And Grims in this world are very mysterious. Nobody really knows all that they're capable of. And it seems like different Grimms or different kinds of Grimms are capable of doing different kinds of magic. And so one of the things I loved about this installment was finally getting to learn more about Grimms. They are very interesting creatures for sure. And this romance truly served everything I wanted. I knew going into this that this was going to be hot. Like, arguably the hottest romance of the series, which is saying a lot because all of the books in this series are very sexy. But Gareth, I just knew he can get it any day of the week. Oh my God, he is hot. He just is. And as hot and amazing as Gareth is, I also loved the discussions that were brought up about his past trauma. He went through a lot basically because he was in the foster care system. He lost both of his parents at a young age. And so I love how his past plays into his future with the plot of this book. I don't want to get too much into it, but there is like this PR competition that Livy and Gareth are both in. And so I just loved how his passion for, you know, making the foster care system better played a role in this story as well. So yes, 5 out of 5 stars. Is it my favorite book of the series? It's really hard for me to pick a favorite among the 4 main books because they all bring something different to the table. They're all obviously about different characters, you know, a different couple, and there's truly something to love about each book. So I don't know if it's like my top favorite, but I absolutely loved it. Next up we have Thank You for Listening by Julia Whelan. I was very excited going into this book because I know Julia Whelan, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well, as a very popular and prolific audiobook narrator. She narrates quite a bit of different genres, and she's very, very talented and amazing at what she does. And so I didn't know that she's actually written a book before this one, but this was a very recent release, and I was excited because the plot of this one sounds like a little bit autobiographical. So this is about Swanee, who was an actress, but she goes through a terrible traumatic event that leaves her with scars, and she now has to wear an eye patch. And so her acting career went out the window because of that. And so she's now been an audiobook narrator for quite a few years. And so the catalyst for this plot is that there is an author who recently passed away. So after this author died, her last wish basically was that Swanee narrate her final book along with another very popular romance audiobook narrator. Swanee doesn't narrate romances anymore. She did that at the very beginning of her career, but she doesn't really believe in love, like believe in romance, so she doesn't want to narrate those kinds of books. And so that's really the catalyst for the plot, is that now she's narrating this audiobook with this very popular romance narrator. So this does have a very strong romance for sure, but I think overall I would consider this to be more just a contemporary fiction novel with a romance than a romance novel, just because I feel like this book focuses more on Swanee's character as a whole, her development, also her various friends and family. There's a lot of very dynamic characters in this book. So I do think the romance was solid though. I don't want to say anything about it just because I feel like anything I say might be a spoiler, because there's a lot of like plot twists involving the romance. But I really loved this. I gave it 5 stars. I think that the reason I love this though was really because of the characters, like I said, and also the writing. Like, I feel like this was written so well. This truly could be like a career-defining moment for Julia Whelan, and I truly hope that she plans on writing more books in the future, because I thought that this was phenomenal, and I definitely want to check out her debut novel. Last but certainly not least, we have Blindsided by Amy Dawes. So this was a book that I was turned on to from Brie from In Love and Words. I remember her raving about this some time ago, and her talking about how it's a friends to lovers romance where there are sex lessons involved and we have a plus-sized heroine, and I was just like Sold. Wow, that sounds fantastic. So this is about Mac and Freya. This does take place in the UK, I think the London area. Mac is a professional football player and Freya is a clothing designer. She works for a clothing store that her and her friends, I think, kind of opened together, if I'm not mistaken. And so Mac and Freya became friends a year before the book started. And so they are very close friends. They spend like all of their time together, but everything has been strictly platonic until Mac learns how inexperienced Freya is when it comes to love and sex and all of those things. And so he decides to tutor her so that she will feel more comfortable to go out on dates, basically. But of course that backfires. Of course real feelings start coming into play between the two of them, and things go on from there. I really love this. I gave this 5 stars. I will say I think this book could annoy people because Freya is very, very naive when it comes to sex. Like, so naive that it's almost unbelievable. You know, Freya is almost 30 years old and she's a virgin, and I just feel like in this day and age, especially with the internet, it's pretty much impossible to live your whole life without learning about things like sex and learning like slang terms and things like that. So it's a bit ridiculous in that regard, but I will say there's something about Freya's naivete that is endearing. It never came off as annoying to me personally, but I could see how it could be annoying to some readers, so I did want to throw that out there. But this was just a wonderful friends to lovers romance. I do want to throw out there that there is a content warning for loss of a loved one. But yeah, like I just had a really fun time with this one. Overall, would definitely recommend it, and I gave it 5 stars. So that's going to be it for my end of September reading wrap up. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video. And as usual, if you want to give me recommendations, or anyone watching this recommendations, I always appreciate that. And I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!